Alright, you are listening to A Word to the Wise. Babylonian Magic and Religion. Alright. Let's see here. Why discuss Babylonian? And when I say Babylonian, I'm kind of intermixing three different cultures, and they were all by each other. They are all geographically located near each other, and a lot of their beliefs, a lot of their culture actually overlaps and is borrowed from one another. And this would be the Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultures. And basically their mythologies will all end up converging into the same thing in a point in history. But anyways, why discuss it? And it's very important. It's basically, well, let's discuss something here. Mesopotamia, which is where all these were located, is considered the cradle of civilization, and this is referring to the apparent origin of our definition of civilization. And this would include, and this is borrowed from Child, and he made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different categories or traits which make a civilization a civilization. And this will be the appearance of urban centers, full-time specialists, which would be like craftsmen, merchant, officials, you know what I mean, monumental public building. So there's some sort of, public center, sizable surplus product, withdrawn by the elite from taxes or tribute, isolating of ruling groups including priests, civil and military leaders and officials, appearance of written language and numerical notation from which there emerge predictive sciences, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, development of the sophisticated artistic style, appearance of distant trade, social solidarity, which is represented and misrepresented by the ideological means in the temple or sepulchral shrine, and the state of the state formation. Some scholars believe the Mesopotamian religions, especially the Babylonian, Assyrian, and Sumerian type, are quite possibly the oldest form of religious belief in the world. And like I mentioned earlier, the religious systems of these areas would eventually merge into the same thing. As usual, names will change, but the personalities, the metaphors, and the teachings a lot of times will remain the same. Since this is the first show where we'll mention a lot of these names here, a lot of them will be brand new. I also suggest writing them down if you're really trying to make a study out of this. But we're going to start off with some of the major figures in Babylonian mythology, and the first one we have is Anu. Anu is part of the Babylonian Trinity. He is known as the sky god. He was king of heaven and lord of the constellations. He was also represented by the great judge, and also king of the gods, spirits, and demons. Anu is prominently associated with the Eanna temple in the city of Uruk. And if you look at this city, you'll notice and keep in mind that it's actually mentioned in the Bible as Erech. And that's in Genesis 10 verse 8, and we'll read it. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. 10 verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. So here we are seeing the connection between Nimrod, which actually I believe in the next Bible series we'll be hitting on Nimrod, and I'll probably go farther into Nimrod in that situation. But let's see. The next one we're going to be reading about is Ea, or sometimes it's called Enki, depending on if you're reading a Babylonian or Assyrian version. He is also part of the Babylonian Trinity. He was the son of Anu. He was associated with the water. The water in most ancient mythologies and symbologies represents generally wisdom. Ea is the god of wisdom. Sometimes took the form of a snake or a serpent. Some scholars say his name meant Lord of the Earth, or King of the Earth. He is credited with giving man the gifts of civilization. Now remember here, we're seeing a sort of parallel between the fallen angels of Genesis 6 and this god of wisdom, Ea or Enki, who, brought man the gifts of civilization that we mentioned earlier. In Egyptian, he is associated with Thoth. In Greek mythology, he is associated with Hermes, and in Roman mythology, he is associated with Mercury. Why? Because in the ancient, as well as the modern, models of the universe, Mercury revolves around the sun, so it was the closest, to the godlike being. His symbols included a goat and a fish, or a lamb and a fish, which later combined into a single beast called the Capricorn. Next, we'll see in the last part of the Trinity, the Babylonian Trinity, is Enlil. Enlil is the god of the wind. And in these times, and this correlates with the Bible, the wind a lot of times is synonymous with spirit. So here you see God of the Spirit in the Babylonian mythology. He was also said to be created by the breath of the union between Anu and Ki. Enlil was the only god that had immediate access to Anu, or the sun, so he held sway over all the other gods with this power. Enlil was also the god of weather. According to the Sumerians, Enlil helped create the humans, but then got tired of their noise and tried to kill them by sending a flood, which we'll get into here after a bit. A mortal known as Utnapishtim survived the flood through the help of another god, Ea, who is the god of wisdom and the god of the water, and he was made immortal by Enlil after Enlil's initial fury. So Ea, the sun, helped humans survive this flood, and then was made immortal by the god of the spirit. Now, anybody who is fairly well versed in Christian, I don't like using the word because I am in fact a Christian, but the Christian quote mythos is that Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The Father, of course, and then you have the Son who saved man, and then you have the Holy Spirit, which and was also not around until after the death of Jesus, biblically. Anyways, let's continue. Also, there's Tiamat, the god of chaos, or the, quote, the first god. And this is a very common myth, and this idea arises in Greek and Roman mythology. Remember, this guy's name is Tiamat. This story is that the earth, the universe, was actually ruled by another god at an earlier time. And in Roman mythology, the god Saturn was the ruler until Zeus took over the job. And some researchers believe, and this is kind of far out, but some researchers believe that so many parallels in mythology would almost lead a person to believe that the planet Saturn was actually closer to the Earth at one time. And that's just food for thought. I can't prove that or whatever. I'm sure, modern day astronomy would laugh at that, but it is an interesting idea, because a lot of, like I said, the older religions do have a time period where there was a god of the old, and that's when he was ruling is the time that you see the golden age, where everything was nice and balanced and perfect, and then the new ruler came and he gave laws to everyone. Okay, next we have Inanna, which is the Sumerian name, Ishtar, which is the Babylonian name, and Astarte, which is the Assyrian name, which translates in English to Easter. For most of this, I'll just call her Ishtar, but she was the goddess of fertility, war, love, and sex, associated with Isis of Egyptian mythology, Aphrodite in Greek mythology, and Venus in Roman. And let's see here. Okay, now, so we have Ishtar, Astarte, da-da-da-da-da. And I wanted to make note that in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 4, and Judges 2, verse 13, Ishtar was the counterpart of Baal worship of the Canaanites. And God rebuked the Israelites specifically about Ishtar and Ashtoreth worship. So you see here that, in the parallel, quote, mythos, you have biblical, I guess, striking down the idea of Ishtar, and then you have the Sumerian and Babylonian mythologies, that was their god. And we'll continue. We have Tammuz, and let's see here. I'm just going to go ahead and go to Wikipedia and read the Tammuz part, because this is also in the Bible, in Ezekiel. I don't know if I should go there and read it, but it's Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14. And what it's talking about, well, let's go into the Wikipedia. I bet it'll cover it. Let's see. I'm an idiot. Hold on. Yeah, sorry guys. I know. Sometimes this doesn't all play out like it's supposed to. Alright. Tammuz, the deity, was the name of a Sumerian god of food and vegetation. In Babylonia, the month Tammuz was established in honor of the eponymous god Tammuz, who originated as a Sumerian shepherd god, the consort of Inanna or Ishtar, in his Akkadian form, the parallel consort of Ishtar. Let's see. Beginning with the summer solstice came a time of mourning in the ancient Near East, as in the Aegean. The Babylonians marked the decline in daylight hours and the onset of killing summer heat and drought with a 6-day funeral for the god. Recent discoveries reconfirm him as an annual life, death, rebirth deity. So, life, death, rebirth. Life, death, resurrection. Okay. So, this is another version of, the Judeo-Christian quote-unquote Messiah. Which, actually, when you read the Bible, they're really nothing alike. And this is where the whole confusion comes from, and you see stuff like the Jesus zeitgeist and all that, is that, yeah, they're similar, but at the same time, they're also being promoted as similar. Because really, yeah, that's... Anyways. So here we have Tammuz. He's a shepherd god of death and rebirth, and is associated with the farming cycle, all that stuff. So we've gotten that far. And you also have Dagon. And if you remember Dagon of biblical, Jonah and the Ark, or not Jonah and the Ark, Jonah and the whale, they were Dagon worshippers. They worshiped the great fish god, which, that's paralleled in all kinds of mythologies. And also, if you ever read H.P. Lovecraft, that's a famous Dagon, where the townspeople all worship, they're all actually fish people and worship that, horror of horrors and unnameable terror and all that. Anyways, we'll get into some of these myths a little further into the show. First, I want to do the Babylonian creation story. And it's just going to be an overview. I don't want to make it this too complicated and in-depth on the first one, because I'm going to try to make this multiple parts, but I figure we should definitely do the creation myth. see here. Okay, this will be a summary. The Babylonian. This is from reformationmedia.org. Babylonian creation story. It doesn't really name an author, but that's where you find it online. It's a PDF, so it's probably a book somewhere. But anyways, the Babylonian creation myth is recounted in, quote, the Epic of Creation, end quote, also known as the Enuma Elish. The Mesopotamian Epic of Creation dates to the late 2nd millennium BC. In the poem, the god Marduk, or Ashur in the Assyrian versions of the poem, is created to defend the divine beings from an attack plotted by the ocean goddess Tiamat. Now remember, Tiamat, the great ocean, in the mysteries is like space, and represents void and without form, and the goddess of old. So here we have Tiamat. We have the hero Marduk offers to save the gods only if he is appointed their supreme unquestioned leader, and is allowed to remain so even after the threat passes. So here we're seeing another version of the Greek myth and the Roman myth of Saturn being, the head god at one point, and Zeus overthrowing him. Or Jupiter overthrowing him, because Zeus is the Greek, And what was his name? It was Kronos, the god of time, in Greek, and Saturn in Roman. The gods agree to Marduk's terms. Marduk challenges Tiamat to combat and destroys her. He then rips her corpse into 2 halves with which he fashions the earth and the skies. Marduk then creates the calendar, organizes the planets, stars, and regulates the moon, sun, and weather. The gods pledge their allegiance to Marduk, and he creates Babylon as the terrestrial counterpart to the realm of the gods. Babylon in ancient Assyrian and Babylonian Chaldee languages means the gate of the gods. So, you can see the parallel between the Tower of Babel being named actually the Tower of the Gods. But, we'll talk about that in the next episode of Word of the Wise. Marduk then destroys Tiamat's husband, Kingu, using his blood to create humankind so that they can do the work of the gods. And there you have, the old Babylonian Zechariah Sitchin idea that the gods created man to be their slaves, which is basically true. But, doesn't parallel with everything like it should. If it was all truly connected, which I think it is in a way, but not to the degree where, Anyways, let's see, what else should we go to? The next one that is valuable is, we're going to read first. Let's see. We're going to read out of Myths of Babylonian Assyria by Donald Mackenzie. Chapter 5, The Myths of Tammuz and Ishtar. Among the gods of Babylonia, none achieved wider and more enduring fame than Tammuz, who is loved by Ishtar, the amorous queen of heaven, the beautiful youth who died and was mourned for and came to life again. He does not figure by his popular name in any of the city pantheons, but from the earliest times of which we have knowledge, until the passing of Babylonian civilization, he played a prominent part in the religious life of the people. Tammuz, like Osiris of Egypt, was an agricultural deity. And as the Babylonian harvest was the gift of the rivers, it is probable that one of his several forms was Damuzi Abzu, Tammuz of the abyss. He was also the child, the heroic lord, the sentinel, the healer, and the patriarch who reigned over the early Babylonians for a considerable period. Tammuz of the abyss was one of the members of the family of Ea, god of the deep, whose other sons in addition to Marduk were Nera, an obscure deity, Ki-Gula, the world destroyer, Bar-Nunta-Sa, broad ear, and Bara and Baragula, probably revealers or oracles. In addition, there was a daughter, Ki-Dami-Azaga, child of the renowned spirit. She may have been identical with Belit-Sheri, who was referred to in the Sumerian hymns as the sister of Tammuz. This family group is probably formed by symbolizing the attributes of Ea and his spouse Damkina. Tammuz, in his character as a patriarch, may have been regarded as a hostage from the gods, the human form of Ea who instructed mankind, like King Osiris, how to grow corn and cultivate fruit trees. As the youth who perished annually, he was the corn spirit. He is referred to in the Bible by his Babylonian name. When Ezekiel detailed the various idolatrous practices of the Israelites, which included the worship of the sun, and, quote, every form of creeping thing and abominable beast, suggestion of the composite monsters of Babylonia, he was brought, quote, to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north. And behold, there sat women, weeping for Tammuz. The weeping ceremony was connected with agricultural rites. Corn deities were weeping deities. They shed fertilizing tears, and the sowers simulated the sorrow of divine mourners when they cast seed in the soil to die, so that it might spring up as corn. This ancient custom, like many others, contributed to the poetic imagery of the Bible. Quote, they that sow in terrors, David sang, shall reap in joy. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. Now, remember, a lot of these, the mystical traditions and the magic and, all that will try to associate all these religions together. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe that is how it works. But to defend that, biblically, there is farming mythology or farming parables and farming, like, one of the key things that you have to understand when you're studying the Bible is that a lot of times, a lot of these things are being associated with different farming methods. Why? Because, that's what they did. So it's not necessarily, think of the symbology of that. The seed is planted into the soil, into darkness, and springs forth and grows towards the light. That's a common theme throughout a lot of different, religious practices. And, I can see multiple cultures figuring that and seeing that symbology in the act of planting a seed. So, to say that they necessarily ripped it off doesn't really hold much credence with me. Anyways, to continue, in Egypt, the priestesses who acted the parts of Isis and Nephthys mourned for the slain corn god Osiris. And we're going to get into that in the next episode of the Mystery Series, the Egyptian myths and magic, so hold tight for all that. Quote, gods and men before the face of gods are weeping for thee at the same time when they behold me. All thy sister goddesses are at thy side and behind thy couch, calling upon thee with weeping, yet thou art prostrate upon thy bed. Live before us, desiring to behold thee. It was believed to be essential that human beings should share the universal sorrow caused by the death of a god. If they remained unsympathetic, the deities would punish them as enemies. Worshippers of nature gods, therefore, based their ceremonial practices on natural phenomena. Quote, the dread of the worshippers that the neglect of the usual ritual would be followed by disaster is particularly intelligible, writes Professor Robertson Smith. Quote, if they regarded the necessary operations of agriculture as involving the violent extinction of a particle of divine life. By observing their ritual, the worshippers won the sympathy and cooperation of the deities, or exercised a magical control over nature. The Babylonian myth of Tammuz, the dying god, bears a close resemblance to the Greek myth of Adonis. It also links with the myth of Osiris. According to Professor Sayce, Tammuz is identical with Daeonus or Deus, the shepherd of Pantibiblia, referred to by Berosus as the ruler of one of the mythical ages of Babylonia. We have therefore to deal with Tammuz in his twofold character as a patriarch and a god of fertility. And you'll see that in Babylonian history, that a lot of the, and you'll see that in other types of history, but the early gods, pre-flood gods, were also kings. So at a certain point in Babylonian history, you have kind of this twofold nature of certain kings where they're gods rather than just some guy who's ruling. The Adonis version of the myth may be summarized briefly. Ere the god was born, his mother, who was pursued by her angry sire, as the river goddesses of the folk tales are pursued by the well demons, transformed herself into a tree. Adonai or Adonis, sprang from the trunk of this tree, and Aphrodite, having placed the child in a chest, committed him to the care of Persephone, queen of Hades, who resembles the Babylonian Ereshkigal. Persephone desired to retain the young god, and the Aphrodite appealed to Zeus, or Ishtar appealed to Anu, who decreed that Adonis should spend part of the youth with one goddess and the part of the year with the other. It is suggested that the myth of Adonis was derived in post-Homeric times by the Greeks indirectly from Babylonia through the Western Semites, the Semitic title Adon, meaning Lord, having been mistaken for a proper name. This theory, however, cannot be accepted without qualifications. It does not explain the existence of either the Phrygian myth of Attis, which was developed differently from the Tammuz myth, or the Celtic story of Diarmid and the boar, which belongs to the archaeological hunting period. There are traces in Greek mythology of pre-Hellenic myths about dying harvest deities like Hyacinthos and Eragon for existence, who appear to have been mourned for. There is every possibility, therefore, that the Tammuz ritual may have been attached to a harvest god of the pre-Hellenic Greeks, who received at the same time the new name of Adonis. Osiris of Egypt resembles Tammuz, but his Mesopotamian origin has not been proved. It would appear probable that Tammuz, Attis, and Osiris, and the deities represented by Adonis and Diarmid were all developed from an archaic god of fertility and vegetation, the central figure of a myth which was not only as ancient as the knowledges and practices of agriculture, but had existed even in the, quote, hunting period. Traces of the Tammuz-Osiris story in various forms are found all over the area occupied by the Mediterranean or brown race from Sumeria to the British Isles. Apparently, the original myth was connected with tree and water worship and the worship of animals. Adonis sprang from a tree. The body of Osiris was concealed in a tree which grew around the sea-drifted chest in which he was concealed. Diarmid concealed himself in a tree when pursued by Finn. The blood of Tammuz, Osiris, and Adonis reddened the swollen rivers with fertilized soil. Various animals were associated with the harvest god, who appears to have been manifested from time to time in different forms, for his spirit pervaded all nature. In Egypt, the soul of Osiris entered the Apis bull or the ram of Mendes. Let's see here. Let's skip down. In his character as a long-lived patriarch, Tammuz, the king of Daonis, or Daos of Berosus, reigned in Babylonia for 36,000 years. Get that, guys. 36,000 years. When he died, he departed to Hades or the abyss. Osiris, after reigning over the Egyptians, became judge of the dead. And now, I mentioned this in the biblical series as well, is that at this, and now remember, Tammuz is in this time period before the flood, and people are living outrageous amounts of time. Now that correlates with the Bible. The time period isn't as long, but regardless, they're still living large amount of years. Tammuz of the Sumerian hymns, however, is the Adonis-like god who lived on earth for a part of the year as the shepherd and agriculturist so dearly beloved by the goddess Ishtar. Then he died, so that he might depart to the realm of Ereshkigal, or the queen of Hades. According to one account, the death was caused by the fickle Ishtar. When the goddess wooed Gilgamesh, the Babylonian Hercules, he upbraided her, saying, O Tammuz, on Tammuz, the spouse of thy youth, thou didst lay affliction every year. References in the Sumerian hymns suggest that there also existed a form of the legend which gave an account of the slaying of the young god by someone else than Ishtar. The slayer may have been a Set-like demon, perhaps Ninshak, who appears to have symbolized the destroying influence of the sun. He was a war deity, and his name, Professor Pinchas says, is conjectured to mean Lord of the Wild Boar. There is no direct evidence, however, to connect Tammuz's slayer with the boar which killed Adonis. Ishtar's innocence is emphasized by the fact that she mourned for her youthful lover. Let's see here. Tammuz died with the dying vegetation, and Diarmid expired when the hills apparently were assuming their purple tints. The month of Tammuz wailings was from 20th of June until the 20th of July. when the heat and dryness brought forth the demons of pestilence. The mourners chanted, he has gone to the bosom of the earth, and the dead are numerous in the land. Men are filled with sorrow. They stagger by day in gloom. In the month of thy year which brings not peace hast thou gone. Thou hast gone on a journey that makes an end of thy people. The following extract contains a reference to the slaying of the god. The Holy One of Ishtar, in the middle of the year the fields languish. The shepherd, the wise man, the man of sorrows, why have they slain? In his temple, in his inhabited domain, the child, Lord of knowledge, abides no more. In the meadows, verily, verily, the soul of life perishes. There is wailing for Tammuz, quote, at the sacred cedar where the mother bore thee. A reference which connects the god like Adonis and Osiris with tree worship. Now, keep that in mind, the tree worship. The wailing is for the herbs. The first lament is, they are not produced. The wailing is for the grain. Ears are not produced. The wailing is for the habitations, for the flock which brings forth no more. The wailing for the perishing wedded ones, for the perishing children. The dark-headed people create no more. The wailing is also for the shrunken river, the parched meadows, the fish pools, the cane brakes, the forests, the plains, the gardens, and the palace, which all suffer because the god of fertility has departed. Whither went Tammuz? His destination has already been referred to as the bosom of the earth, and in the Assyrian version of the descent of Ishtar, he dwells in the, quote, house of darkness among the dead, where dust is their nourishment and their food mud, and the light is never seen, the gloomy Babylonian Hades. In one of the Sumerian hymns, however, it is stated that Tammuz, quote, upon the flood was cast out. The reference may be the submarine house of Ea, or the blessed island to which the Babylonian Noah was carried. In this Hades bloomed the nether garden of Adonis, and, yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting stuff here. Alright, I think we've got enough in that. Now let's see, what else? I'd like to get into the Epic of Gilgamesh a little bit. Okay, we're going to do a Spark Notes plot overview of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The epic's prelude offers a general introduction to Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. He built magnificent ziggurats, which were temples, or surrounded his city with high walls, and laid out his orchards and fields. He was physically beautiful, immensely strong, and very wise. Although Gilgamesh was godlike in body and mind, he began his kingship as a cruel despot, which is like a king. He lorded over his subjects, raping any woman who struck his fancy, whether she was the wife of one of his warriors or the daughter of a nobleman. He accomplished his building projects with forced labor, and his exhausted subjects groaned under his oppression. The gods heard his subjects' pleas and decided to keep Gilgamesh in check by creating a wild man, which, Bigfoot people, keep your ears open, created a wild man named Enkidu, who was as magnificent as Gilgamesh. Enkidu became Gilgamesh's great friend, and Gilgamesh's heart was shattered when Enkidu died of an illness inflicted by the gods. Gilgamesh then traveled to the edge of the world and learned about the days before the deluge, which is the great flood, and other secrets of the gods, and he recorded them on stone tablets. The epic begins with Enkidu. He lives with the animals, suckling at their breasts, grazing in the meadows, and drinking at their watering places. A hunter discovers him and sends a temple prostitute into the wilderness to tame him. Beauty and the Beast. In that time, people considered women and sex calming forces that could domesticate wild men like Enkidu and bring them into the civilized world. When Enkidu sleeps with the woman, the animals reject him since he is no longer one of them. Now he is part of the human world. Little Mermaid. Then the harlot teaches him everything he needs to know to be a man. Enkidu is outraged by what he hears about Gilgamesh's excesses, so he travels to Uruk to challenge him. When he arrives, Gilgamesh is about to force his way into a bride's wedding chamber. Enkidu steps into the doorway and blocks the passage. The two men wrestle fiercely for a long time, and Gilgamesh finally prevails. After that, they become friends and set about looking for an adventure to share. Gilgamesh and Enkidu decide to steal trees from a distant cedar forest forbidden to mortals. Let me read that again for you. word to the wise fans, Gilgamesh and Enkidu decide to steal trees from a distant cedar forest forbidden to mortals. A terrifying demon named Humbaba, the devoted servant of Enlil, god of earth, wind, and air, guards it. The two heroes make the perilous journey to the forest, and standing side by side, fight with the monster. With assistance from Shamash, the sun god, they kill him. Then they cut down the forbidden trees, fashion the tallest into an enormous gate, make the rest into a raft, and float on it back to Uruk. Upon their arrival, Ishtar, the goddess of love, is overcome with lust for Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh spurns her. Enraged, the goddess asks her father, Anu, god of the sky, to send the bull of heaven to punish him. What is the bull of heaven? The bull of heaven is Taurus. The bull comes down from the sky, bringing with him 7 years of famine. Gilgamesh and Enkidu wrestle with the bull and kill it. The gods meet in council and agree that one of the two friends must be punished for their transgression, and they decide Enkidu is going to die. He takes ill, suffers immensely, and shares his visions of the underworld with Gilgamesh. When he finally dies, Gilgamesh is heartbroken. Gilgamesh can't stop grieving for Enkidu, and he can't stop brooding over the prospect of his own death. Exchanging his kingly garments for animal skins as a way of mourning Enkidu, he sets off into the wilderness, determined to find Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah. After the flood, the gods had granted Utnapishtim eternal life, and Gilgamesh hopes that Utnapishtim can tell him how he might avoid death too. Gilgamesh's journey takes him to the twin-peaked mountain called Mashu, where the sun sets into one side of the mountain at night and rises out of the other side in the morning. Utnapishtim lives beyond the mountain, but the two scorpion monsters that guard its entrance refuse to allow Gilgamesh into the tunnel that passes through it. Gilgamesh pleads with them, and they relent. After a harrowing passage through total darkness, Gilgamesh emerges into a beautiful garden by the sea. There he meets Siduri. Now remember, keep these allegories of the cave, this cave stuff, keep it in mind. I bet he was in that darkness for 3 days too. There he meets Siduri, a veiled tavern keeper, and tells her about his quest. She warns him that seeking immortality is futile, and that he should be satisfied with the pleasures of this world. However, when she can't turn him away from his purpose, she directs him to Urshnabi, the ferryman. Urshnabi takes Gilgamesh on the boat journey across the sea and through the waters of death. So here we have Gilgamesh traveling through the cave of death, darkness, and now he's going across the river of death with a ferryman. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh the story of the flood, how the gods met in council and decided to destroy mankind. Ea, the god of wisdom, warned Utnapishtim about the gods' plans and told him how to fashion a gigantic boat in which his family and the seed of every living creature might escape. When the waters finally receded, the gods regretted what they'd done and agreed that they would never try to destroy humankind again. Now, are you listening to this story? This is totally similar to Noah's flood, or the last episode of Word of the Wise. When Gilgamesh insists that he be allowed to live forever, Utnapishtim gives him a test. If you think you can stay alive for eternity, he says, surely you can stay awake for a week. Gilgamesh tries and immediately fails, so Utnapishtim orders him to clean himself up, put on his royal garments again, and return to Uruk where he belongs. Just as Gilgamesh is departing, however, Utnapishtim's wife convinces him to tell Gilgamesh about a miraculous plant that restores youth. Gilgamesh finds the plant and takes it with him, planning to share it with the elders of Uruk. But a snake, a serpent, steals the plant of life one night while they are camping. As the serpent slithers away, it sheds its skin and becomes young again. When Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, he is empty-handed, but reconciled at last to his mortality. He knows that he can't live forever, but that humankind will. Now he sees that the city he had repudiated in his grief and terror is a magnificent, enduring achievement. the closest thing to immortality to which a mortal can aspire. Alright, that was the Epic of Gilgamesh, and as you could see, there's a lot of parallels in that story with other whatever you want to call it. Now, let's see. I'm going to read from two places about the magic. First, we're going to do demons, fairies, and ghosts. Let's see here. Chapter 4 of Myths of Babylonian Assyria. The memorable sermon preached by Paul to the Athenians when he stood in the midst of Mars Hill could have been addressed with equal appropriateness to the ancient Sumerians and Akkadians. Now remember guys, this is not necessarily how it really goes. Quote, I perceive, he declared, that, quote, that in all things ye are too superstitious. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwells not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing he gives to all life, death, breath, and all things. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is likened to gold or silver, or stone, graven by art and man's device. Babylonian temples were houses of the gods in the literal sense. The gods were supposed to dwell in them, their spirits having entered into the graven images or blocks of stone. It is probable that, like the ancient Egyptians, they believed a god has many spirits as he had attributes. The gods, as we have said, appear to have evolved from early spirit groups. All the world swarmed with spirits, which inhabited stones, trees, mountains, and deserts, rivers and oceans, the air, the sky, the stars, the sun, and the moon. Now remember, guys, remember back to the sacred and the profane show. Generally, the profane, or the people, were very, very highly superstitious. But a lot of times the priesthood didn't really believe in all that. They were going for more of a spiritual meaning, or a deeper meaning, symbolic meaning, really. The spirits controlled nature. They brought light and darkness, sunshine and the storm, summer and winter. They were manifested in the thunderstorm, the sandstorm, the glare of sunset, and the wraiths of mist rising from the steaming marshes. They controlled also the lives of men and women. The good spirits were the source of luck. The bad spirits caused misfortunes and were ever seeking to work evil against the Babylonian. Darkness was peopled by demons and ghosts of the dead. The spirits of disease were ever lying in wait to clutch him with cruel, invisible hands. Now here, this writer disagrees with this point of view that I just put forward, but we'll go with it. Some modern writers, who are too prone to regard ancient peoples from a 20th century point of view, express grave doubts as to whether intelligent Babylonians really believed that spirits came down in the rain and entered the soil to rise up before men's eyes as stalks of barley or wheat. There is no reason for supposing that they thought otherwise. The early folks based their theories on the accumulated knowledge of their age. They knew nothing regarding the composition of water or the atmosphere, of the cause of thunder and lightning, or of the chemical changes effected in soils by the action of bacteria. They attributed all natural phenomena to the operations of spirit or gods. In believing that certain demons cause certain diseases, they may be said to have achieved distinct progress, for they anticipated the germ theory. They made discoveries, too, which have been approved and elaborated in later times, when they lit sacred fires, bathed in sacred waters, and used oils and herbs to charm away spirits of pestilence. Indeed, many folk cures which were originally associated with magical ceremonies are still practiced in our own day. They were found to be effective by early observers, although they were unable to explain why and how cures were accomplished. In peopling the universe with spirits, the Babylonians, like other ancient folks, betrayed their tendency to symbolize everything which has ever appealed to the human mind. Our painters and poets and sculptors are greatest when they symbolize their ideals, ideas, and impressions. Dang! And by so doing, make us respond to their moods. Their beauty and their terror are sublime. But what may seem poetic to us was invariably a grim reality to the Babylonians. The statue or picture was not merely a work of art, but a manifestation of the god or demon. As has been said, they believed that the spirit of the god inhabited the idol. The frown of the brazen image was the frown of the wicked demon. They entertained as much dread of the winged and human-headed bulls guarding the entrance to the royal palace as do some of the Arab workmen who, in their own day, assisted excavators to rescue them from sandy mounds in which they have been hidden for long centuries. Oh, let's see here. What else should we read? Well, I'm going to not read all this because I'm going to do a part 2 of this because this really is a lot of information to try to friggin' go through. I'm going to go through one more reading. This is by the book The Babylonians by H.W.F. Saggs. And this is... Let me see if I can find the right chapter. Chapter 11. Though the Babylonians were by no means savages, one does well in studying their religion to bear Dr. Johnson's warning in mind. Very different conclusions can be reached depending on whether we are trying to get at religion as it was practiced and experienced by the common man and his family in the mud hut, or whether we are considering the systematized theology of priests and scholars. Here the emphasis will be upon trying to see how religion actually affected ordinary Babylonians. Knowledge of Babylonian religion has never been completely dead, inasmuch as some details of it were preserved in classical writers and in the Old Testament. From these sources alone, enough remains for the definitive assertion that Babylonian religion was polytheistic and strongly marked by features associated with fertility cults. Classical sources amplify this with some details of Babylonian cosmogony. The principal material of the latter kind comes from the fragments quoted in other ancient authors of a work written in Greek by Berossus, a Babylonian priest of 340 to 275 BC. These scanty and distorted details have been enormously augmented and much clarified by the mass of cuneiform material of religious significance which has come to light since the middle of the 19th century. This material includes epics, myths, hymns, prayers, incantations, exorcisms, ethical treatises and proverbs, omens, ritual instructions, lists of god names, and so on. Even a prosaic business receipt may shed light on the cult when it refers to such matters as the delivery of beasts for sacrifice or equipment for rituals. The great majority of the documents are written in either Akkadian or Sumerian or bilingually in both. Occasionally a Hittite or Hurrian text from Asia Minor or Syria sheds light on religious practice inside Mesopotamia. Let's see. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. From early in the 3rd millennium, the ordinary man in the Sumero-Babylonian world saw himself surrounded by supernatural forces, ranging from gods to demons. But there was an earlier stage before clearly defined gods emerged. Imagine how primitive man in South Mesopotamia saw his world. There were many natural forces affecting him, and the same force might act for good or ill. For example, up to a point, water was undoubtedly good. Without it, the earth grew parched, and drought and famine and death ensued. With it, there were good harvests, and the cattle thrived. But too much water could be bad, causing floods which brought death and destruction. There was the same ambivalence for the sun, or the winds, or the thunderstorms. Thunderstorms are terrifying. People and cattle can be struck by lightning, and buildings and forests set on fire. But thunderstorms can also bring rain to drench the earth after a drought, and cooler air after intense heat. To primitive man, all natural forces are in themselves neither good nor bad. They are just there. Powerful forces controlling human existence. At a later stage, man begins to think of everything in personal terms, and so he begins to personify the waters, the winds, the thunderstorms. Gradually, what used to be seen as impersonal forces become thought of as personal supernatural beings. The change from one concept to another becomes reflected in terms of myth as a superhuman personal being that we could call a god, defeating the old non-personal representation of the same force. To rationalize this, primitive man splits the old concept of the supernatural force into its two opposing elements, its good side and its bad side. This is linked to the struggle between the god and the old non-personal force, and in this way the god comes to take on the beneficent qualities of, say, the waters, whilst the old concept in non-human form remains linked to their evil aspect. Let's see here. Let's skip to amulets. For protection from demons or for deliverance in the event of attack, the Babylonians had the constellations of official and popular religion in many forms. An amulet might be worn as a prophylactic, and the great gods themselves did not scorn such magical devices. For when Marduk went to combat with the primeval monster Tiamat, in his hand was clasped a plant to annul poison. In its most elaborate form, an amulet bore a betrayal of the devil against whom protection was sought, and a magical incantation invoking the great gods against the threatened evil. One such reads, "That one which has approached the house scares me from my bed, rends me, makes me see nightmares. May they consign him to the god Bine, gatekeeper of the underworld, by the decree of Ninurta, prince of the underworld, by the decree of Marduk, who dwells in Esagila in Babylon. Let door and bolt know that I am under the protection of the two lords." One common type of amulet seems to have originated as protection against the appalling discomfort and even danger of the hot west wind, which in summer brings sandstorms into Babylonia from the desert. This amulet took the form of either a grotesque head of the demon carved in the round or a bronze or stone plaque of the whole creature, with a bird-like chest, human arms and legs terminating in talons, with one hand holding a thunderbolt aloft, 4 wings and a curled tail. In either form, the inscription on the back of the amulet reads, "I am the god Pazuzu, son of the god Hanbi, king of the evil wind demons. It is I who rage mightily in the mountain of the underworld, so that they come up. As to those winds which accompany them, the west wind is stationed at their front. The wind, their wings, are broken." The last phrase here is apparently the magical formula which rendered the demons powerless against the possessor of the amulet. Another type of amulet to protect women in childbirth was specifically directed against Lamushtu, the she-demon who threatened pregnant women and nursing mothers. There was also a whole series of rituals against this dreaded being. When a victim already showed symptoms of demonic possession, an exorcist was called in to diagnose the malady and to expel the evil spirit. After invoking a god, he or an assistant would recite the proper incantation accompanied by the appropriate ritual. Most commonly, the god invoked was Marduk, son of Ea, the god of magic. So we have Ea, the god of magic, wisdom. In some contexts, long series of deities are named to help against the demons, but not all deities were equally willing or potent to assist suffering humanity. But Ea, one of the first triad, was a constant friend of mankind, always alert to assuage the danger of other gods or to frustrate the malevolence of demons. As god of wisdom, he was the supreme authority on magic, and he freely imparted his knowledge to his son Marduk. The usual procedure for a man in distress was for him to apply for help to Marduk through an exorcist. The typical liturgy then depicts Marduk going to his father Ea, repeating the problem concerned and receiving the courteous answer, "My son, what do you not know?" followed by advice on the magical procedure for the case in hand. Fire was a great power against magic and evil influences, and as to the 3 fire gods, Gira, Gibel, and Nusku were potent against black magic. The exorcists performed such incantations and rituals against evil influences were known in Akkadian as Ashipu. Shipu, where was I? And Mashmashu. It is possible that the two terms were alternative writings for the same functionary. Whether or not we call such people priests depends upon what we understand by priest. Illness was thought to be due to evil forces, and so such functionaries were also concerned with healing and sick. For this they might employ incantations and rituals, either alone or in association with surgical or medical techniques. The following text shows a blend of magic and practical measures in the treatment for toothache. After Anu had made the heavens made the earth made the rivers made the canals, and canals made the mud made the worm. The worm came weeping before Shamash, shed tears before Ea. What will you give me for my food? Ea replied, I will give you the ripe fig. The worm said, What is the ripe fig to me? Let me drink among the teeth, and set me on the gums, that I may consume the blood of the teeth and destroy the marrow of the gums. Because you said this, O worm, may Ea strike you with the might of his fist. The sentence italicized obviously contains the instruction to the operator. The final sentence presumably accompanied the wrench that brought out the tooth beneath which the offending worm lurked. The text concludes the instructions for the preparation of a mouthwash of beer, oil, and herbs. The exorcist techniques often rested upon less practical measures, particularly the use of sympathetic or symbolic magic. We find an illustration of this in a text which first states that, quote, an evil curse has been put on this man like a Galu demon, and then mentions his symptoms. A day's silence has been put on him, an unwholesome silence, an evil curse, a spell, a headache. His God has gone away from him. Then, says the text, Marduk noticed the man, went to his father Ea, and outlined the situation. Ea, after his usual courteous disclaimer of superior knowledge, gave Marduk instructions for the cure. Go, my son Marduk, take him to the pure ablution house. Loose his spell, that the activating evil of his body, whether a curse related to his father, a curse related to his mother, a curse related to his elder brother, a curse related to the murder of a man he does not know. By the conjuration of Ea, let the curse be peeled off like this onion. Let it be wrenched apart like this date. Let it be untwined like this wick. Separate incantations then followed for the onion, the date, and the wick to be recited while the exorcist performs symbolic actions. Like this onion which he peels and throws into the fire, which the fire consumes entirely, whose roots will not take hold in the soil, whose shoots will not sprout, that will not be used for the meal of a god or a king, so may oath, curse, sickness, weariness, guilt, sin, wickedness, transgression, the sickness that is in my body, my flesh, or my limbs, be peeled off like this onion. May the fire consume it entirely today. May the curse be taken away, that I may see the light. The mention of the pure ablution house suggests that the ceremony in question was performed at the temple, but this was not invariable. In other cases, the rites might take place in a private house, in a sick room, in a reed hut alongside the river, or in the open country. Let's see here. Boy, I think I'm just going to end this one today right here, and we'll call this part 1. So yeah, in the next couple days you'll see part 2, and we'll continue our study of Babylonian and Babylonian magic and religion. Thank you very much.